Trump has greatly impacted America's domestic and international priorities. Joining us now is retired U.S. Navy Captain Armen Kurdian. He's also a foreign policy and national security analyst, as well as a California State Senate candidate. And we have Gerard Filitti, attorney specializing in international law, as well as a foreign affairs analyst specializing in the Middle East. So good afternoon to you both. Happy New Year. Happy 2026. So I just wanted to have a conversation today about what President Trump has done over the past year, his policies. And one of the first acts was to address illegal immigration by the Trump administration. And if I may, Armen, I'll start with you. Customs and Border Protection reports that illegal immigration dropped to the lowest numbers in recorded history. What has President Trump gotten right on immigration, and what more needs to be done?
Good day, Don, and Happy New Year. He's shown that process is the way you got to look at a lot of things. When something's not working, you don't just throw more money at a problem. You saw Secretary Mayorkas under the previous administration and Joe Biden and everybody saying, we need more money. Congress needs to do its job, blah, 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 blah. Obviously, that was not true. With simple executive orders, direction, and allowing the Customs and Border Patrol and ICE to do their job and follow the law as it is written, he was able to bring this down to by 94%. I think a lot of folks forget that with all this protests that are happening in our cities, the fact that immigrants aren't dying at the border, they aren't dying in lawless parts of Central and South America, that how many lives have actually been saved by this action, how many people are going to live because Donald Trump is actually enforcing the law. That is a statistic that is not spoken highly enough.
Okay, Gerard, let me go to you now. What are your thoughts on this topic?
Look, I think President Trump has accomplished a lot in the last year, resetting American priorities, both domestically and internationally. We've seen the decrease in immigration, we've seen crime, we've seen stability relations with our allies, something that was severely missing under President Biden. So what we really see is a new beginning. What Trump has done as America First is to enforce American priorities, and that means our economy and our foreign interests are now aligned with what we can do. So this has really been a dramatic change from in the last 4 years.
Okay, so Armen, Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, right? So the law gives him authority to target members of MS-13, Tren de Aragua. So I want to ask you, Armen, have Trump's immigration policies helped to make streets safer?
Absolutely. The number of violent criminals that have been taken off our streets, whether they're crimes that he committed here in the United States or crimes that were committed outside of the United States. Again, child sex traffickers, drug traffickers, assault, fraud, all these kinds of crimes, murder. The number of people, I don't even know that the CBP has a good idea, and ICE has a good idea of how many they've taken out, but it is a lot of folks. Trump has basically tried to use every measure on the books that he possibly can to try to make our country safer. He's done a very good job of it. And I have never seen elected leaders and city councils all the way up through governors work so hard to try to protect criminals and keep them in their own cities.
So, Gerard, same question to you. Armen says streets are safer. What is your view on the success of making America safer through the lens of immigration?
Well, the success here is that President Trump has actually done something about it. He's actually implemented measures based on the law in order to deal with these issues. He hasn't ignored crime, transnational crime, international terrorist organizations, including drug cartels. He didn't make it a local issue, which many other administrations have done. He made it a national priority, and that meant that we could use the armed forces. That means we can use the National Guard in certain cities. That means that all forces of the government are going into combating these transnational organizations that have done so much harm on a local level. So for the first time, really ever, local authorities are getting the help that they need from the federal government to deal with these problems. That's really unique under President Trump.
Okay, Armen, another thing that perhaps some may argue was controversial this year. What are your thoughts on his executive order to end birthright citizenship?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. And there's a part of me that finds the idea of being born on American soil as something that is majestic, something that is a dream for a lot of people. We have to make sure that that process, though, is not simply abused, that people simply aren't coming across the border to have children and then leave. I think this is something that the Supreme Court is going to have to take up. Obviously, the question is, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The Supreme Court has ruled in certain cases that anybody born on U.S. soil, such as, say, a child born to parents who are citizens of a country that is engaged in hostilities with the U.S., would not count as citizenship, or someone who was wanted by a foreign government for law enforcement is also not subject to this jurisdiction. So I think if the president tries to say, we're going to end all birthright citizenship, he is probably going to lose. But if he can come up with some very specific situations and perhaps limit it, this is not the biggest problem, obviously, within the U.S. I know we have this problem with anchor babies. People talk about it. But the larger problem has always been simply the influx of people coming across the border, men or women, whether or not they're having children. So this is something they need to look at. I think if he's judicious in what he asks the Supreme Court to rule on, he could be successful.
Gerard, Armin raises the issue of potential abuse in this subject. The Supreme Court is expected to further rule on it this year. Where do you see this going? How could it impact the nation?
Well, that's absolutely right, that the Supreme Court will be the final arbiter of what the 14th Amendment says and whether birthright citizenship remains unchanged as we have understood it for the last 100 years or so, or whether it will change in accordance with Donald Trump's executive order. I think regardless of how the court rules, what this shows is that Americans who voted for Donald Trump, and the priority of this government is to make sure that our resources are going back to the people who pay the taxes, who are here legally, who follow the rules. I think that what Donald Trump is really going at with birthright citizenship is the drain on our economy that has happened for many, many years now, where benefits, we see this in Minnesota, we see this in many states, the fraud and abuse that's happening. And part of it can be traced to people who come here, not just to give birth, but to abuse our system. So this really fits in part of the larger immigration question and the cost that illegal immigration has had on our country. Sure, we need legal immigrants, but we need to have that structured. And this is really revolutionary that under the Trump administration, we're finally seeing that structure.
Okay, Armin, there's just so much President Trump has done this year. Let me try to fit in maybe one or two more things. His tariffs, on more than 80 countries. He attributed ending wars to tariffs, trillions of investment into the U.S. as well. And the inflation rate is actually currently lower than when it was at when Trump took office. So, Armin, how has Trump's use of tariffs impacted U.S. interests domestically and abroad?
I think it's a little surprising to a lot of us, even a lot of conservative economists who thought that a lot of these tariffs were going to lead to an economic slowdown, not necessarily inflation in and of itself. But seeing inflation coming down, I think one of the biggest things that Trump has done that's related to the economic boom has been the forceful deregulation of the U.S., especially when it comes to the energy industry. Energy costs, are basically go into everything else that we do within the United States. So it's all part of a larger picture. Now, I think he went a little bit overboard early on when he picked a fight in the entire planet on tariffs, but I think cooler heads prevailed. And he is being able to use them a little bit more judiciously and also as a punitive measure, not just for, other economic imbalances around the world, but also for non-economic issues, which I think tariffs can be used for. So that, the big, beautiful bill, the deregulation, the growth that we have seen, unfortunately, back during 2020, we had massive growth. We had massive employment. Unemployment was at its lowest level forever, and COVID hit. I think this time Donald Trump is going to end his term with a significant economic growth and very large employment.
Okay, Gerard, we just have about 60 seconds here. Did Trump go overboard, as Armin said, about his tariffs?
Armin is absolutely right about the importance of deregulation. That is what is going to be driving economic growth and manufacturing growth. It's scaling back on all the regulations and high costs that have impeded American businesses and American manufacturing. The tariffs, I think we have seen that overall they've been a net benefit, but the way they were implemented was very rough. It cost a lot of opportunities for American companies that had the uncertainty of where we were going with tariffs, and that needed to be priced into their business models. To some extent, we still do have that uncertainty despite the Supreme Court ruling, because President Trump has indicated that he still wants to implement tariffs, but he needs a different basis to do so. So the tariff question is yet to play out in 2026, but so far it's been a benefit to the American economy.
All right, well said, both of you. Thank you so much for speaking with us on this New Year's Day. Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Homicides are on pace to see the biggest single-year drop the U.S. has ever seen, according to a new report. Find out why after this break.